Characteristics of that decision maker. Characteristics of the decision maker then play a role. A lot of times the significance of influences are going to play a role because of all the different things that go into it, the sources, that then parlays into the person's decision and to the person's outcome. Now, if we're talking about business ethics, you've got to bring up law, because you can't talk about business ethics without at least saying there's a lot of this stuff that we're talking about is covered, at least minimally, from a legal standpoint. Like, I can't hire 8-year-old children and pay them $2 an hour to come stuff envelopes at Focus Press. That's against the law. It's unethical, too. When you look on the screen, you'll notice there are a bunch of different things that play into how a normal person in society comes up with their decision.
What is law often represented?
Notice I've got at the very bottom of the screen religious beliefs. If that person is an understanding New Testament Christian, all of the other stuff realistically should not even be on the screen. Because ultimately whatever God says, does, or proves is right. So it doesn't matter what society says at large, or your employer, or your friends, or even your wife. Ultimately, the only thing should be the foundation of God's Word. But you add all of this other stuff in, and you begin to see why our society is basically morally schizophrenic. They go in all kinds of different directions. Here's just a little diagram on the 3 areas of organization versus what most companies put on the other side of the tally, and that would be profits. So, is the decision going to violate employee trust or investor loyalty and trust? Or is it going to affect customer satisfaction and trust? All of those things are weighed ultimately against profits. And everybody in that room, you know that there are deals that go on sometimes where men will sit around a table and they'll basically say, okay, can we shave a little bit off here? And even though they're not saying it outright, they're not saying, is this going to affect our investors? Is this going to affect our customer satisfaction? They're basically saying that in a roundabout way. Can we shave 2 ounces off of our candy bar, still sell it in the same package for the same price? Let's see, we left off with Chuck, and let's go with let's go with Dean.
Yes.
No, I can't wear it.
All right, Dean. Here we go. Joseph Freiberg had been with Alcon for 18 months. He'd begun his career right out of college with a firm of Southwest called Cala Industries, which specializes in air compressors. Because of his work at Cala, he had been lured away to Alcon in Omaha as sales manager. His first 6 months had been rather hard, working with salespeople older than he, trying to get a handle on the people's sales territories, settling into corporate culture. During those 6 months, he also bought a house, and his fiancée, Ellen, furnished it. Ellen stepped right in, decided almost everything from the color of the rugs to the style of the curtains. Ellen had taken a brokerage job with Trout Brothers and seemed to be working even more hours than Joseph. But the long days were finally paying off. Ellen was now starting to handle some major clients. She was being noticed by the right crowd in wealthier Omaha areas. Things were looking good. Costs for the new home had exceeded their anticipated spending limit, and plans for the wedding seemed to be getting larger and larger. What started out as just a $5,000 wedding was now pushing $17,000. In addition, Ellen was commuting from her apartment to a new home and into her job, and the commute was killing her. So she decided to lease something that exuded success. She asked and received a Mercedes-Benz. Her future husband said, "Don't you think a Mercedes is a little bit out of our range? What are the payments?" She said, "Don't worry, darling. When my clients see me in this, as well as when we start entertaining at the new house, The payments on the car seem like a small compared to the money I'll be making. She gave him a kiss on the cheek and went on. By the time the wedding, the honeymoon, Joseph and Ellen's bank account looked like a bullfighter's red cape. Everything was overdrawn. Don't worry, Joseph. Everything will be okay. You've got a good job. I've got a good job. We're young. We have hard drive. Things are going to straighten out and work. Ellen said this as she walked by a Rolex watch in the store window. At the wedding, things did settle down to a hectic pace given their two careers. Joseph realized that Alcon was a paternal type of organization with good benefits, tremendous growth potential. He had identified whom to be friends with and who to stay away from in the company. While doing some regular checkup work on sales personnel, Joseph found out that Carl had been giving kickbacks to some of his buyers. Carl was another employee. His sales volume accounted for a substantial amount of the company's existing client sales, and he had been a trainer for the company for several years. Carl also happened to be the vice president's son-in-law. Joseph started to check on the other reps more closely and discovered that although Carl seemed to be the biggest offender, 3 of the 10 people in his office were doing the same thing. They were giving kickbacks to some of their buyers. Next day, Joseph looked up Alcon's policy in the handbook and found this statement. It says, our company stands for doing the right thing at all times and giving our customers the best product for the best prices. There was no specific mention of kickbacks, but everyone knew that kickbacks ultimately reduce fair competition, which eventually leads to reduced quality and increased prices for customers. By talking to a few of the old-timers at Alcon, Joseph learned that there had been sporadic enforcement of this no kickback policy. Basically, when times were good, it became unacceptable. When times were bad, it slipped into the acceptable range. And then there was his boss, Catherine, the vice president. Joseph knew that Catherine had a tendency to shoot the bearer of bad news. He remembered a story that he had heard about a sales manager coming in to see Karen to explain an error in a bid that one of his salespeople had made. Karen called the entire staff and fired the salesman on the spot. Then, smiling, she told the sales manager, this was your second mistake, so I hope that you can get a good recommendation from personnel. You have 2 weeks to find employment elsewhere. From then on, his boss's nickname was Jaws. Trying to solve the problem that he was facing, Joseph broached the subject of kickbacks at his monthly meeting with Carl. Carl responded, you've been in this business long enough to know that this happens all the time. I see nothing wrong with it. Besides, I take the money out of my commission. You know that right now I'm trying to pay off some big medical bills. I've gotten tacit clearance from above, but I wouldn't mention that if I were you. Joseph knew the chain of command structure in the company made it very dangerous to go directly to the vice president with this type of information. As Joseph was pondering whether to do nothing or whether to start calling people, he received a call from his wife on his cell phone. It was Ellen. She said, honey, guess what just happened? Catherine, your boss, has decided to use me as her new broker. Isn't that great news? What do you do?
Well, the policy, from what I wrote down, correct me if I'm wrong, there's nothing specific in the policy that says you can't do that, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So, I guess I need to define what does he mean by kickbacks? What is that?
If you go with me, then I'm going to slide you a little something on the side.
Gotcha. Well, you can't do that.
Okay, why not?
Because it violates, I think, because they said that doing that increases profit for the company, but less quality for the customer, correct?
Okay.
But the policy handbook, from what I heard, says that they're there to supply the best quality to the customer.
So, bottom line it for me. Are you going to say something to Carl, to Catherine, or to Catherine's boss? Or are you going to keep your mouth shut and keep working?
Oh, I'm not going to keep my mouth shut. I'm going to say something to...
That's a surprise.
But, yeah, you've got to say something. I mean, you can't just... Even if your wife is the broker for her, you've got to say something to Catherine or say something. If there's somebody over top of Catherine, or that be getting involved with the government, you've got to say something. Just because they were reckless with their money doesn't mean that you just throw out the truth of the matter, which is that they're operating illegally in order to save, that Benz that your wife decided that she was going to roll in.
All right. You still haven't landed the plane. All you're doing is circling, Dean. I need you to drop the gear and land the plane.
I said you've got to say something.
Who?
You say something to Catherine or somebody over top of her. I said if there's anybody over top of her, you go to her.
So you're gonna violate chain of command.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. All right. Anybody want to
bury him deep?
Anybody got any other thoughts you might throw
I'm
into
just
that?
landing the plane, Brad. I'm just landing the plane.
He just cracking.
Everybody on board. Anybody want to add something to that? Guys, it's very easy for us to sit in a comfortable classroom and look at these things. But can you imagine for just a moment if you are up to your neck in bills, you're newlywed, and your wife comes to you and says, I just landed this huge deal. And you smile. How easy is it going to be for you to say, oh, by the way, darling, I'm fixing to go take her down and the guy underneath her too. And that's probably going to blow up your big deal. And so financially, we're going to be not just worse, we're going to be multiple times worse off than we are right now. All right, no comments, no questions. We're going to roll. What about basically how should a Christian respond when it comes to some of these dilemmas? If you see on the screen, there are 3 circles. One is ethical responsibility, one is legal responsibility, one is economic responsibility. The key would be to getting everything in the zone that is marked 1, because that represents an area in business where you are profitable, where you are legal, and where everything that you're doing is ethical. So that's like the perfect trifecta. Area 2A to the lower right would be profitable and legal, but not necessarily ethical. Meaning, if you were put on a court stand, absolutely you're doing everything legally, but there may be some hinky stuff in there. 2B would be profitable and ethical, probably legal, but you'd have to proceed with caution. Area 3 is legal and ethical, but not profitable. So you're a great guy, you're doing everything right, but because you're doing everything so right, crossing every I, T, etc., you're losing money, and the company's going to end up down the drain.
You got a home in heaven.
But you do have a home in heaven. There you go. When you look at what does business ethics really mean, there's 3 definitions you guys need to be aware of. You got ethics, which involves discipline of examining good or bad. You got moral conduct, which is behavior that is right or wrong. Business ethics include practices and behaviors that are good and bad. 2 branches. You've got descriptive, which involves describing or characterizing and studying morality. In other words, what is. This is what is happening in our company. Normative ethics involves supplying and justifying a moral system. In other words, what should be. So one of the questions that we got to think about is, let's say you start working somewhere the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to take a pulse, so the descriptive ethic approach, and say, okay, where are we? This is what is happening in this system. And then you're going to take another pulse and you say, this is what should be. So the question then becomes, how do you get from what is to what ought to be? And ultimately, what would be our motive? Now, as Christians, we said at the beginning, this is a Christian ethics class. Our motive should always be Christ-centered around eternity. But that's not the way the world works. Unfortunately, the world works with three different types of management ethics. You've got people out there who are moral, you got people who are amoral, and you got people who are immoral. And if we look at each one of those for just a moment, immoral management would be somebody that's basically just says, you know what, don't care, let's just get it done. Let's do whatever we got to do to make money. Moral management would be somebody who conforms to standards and they literally change company policy based on doing right. Somebody says, well, you know what, this is going to cost your company $20,000 in order to make things up to code. The guy looks at it, he realizes, I don't like that, but you know what, we got to do what we got to do. Amoral management would be intentionally not really considering ethical factors. You basically are trying to operate in a vacuum where what you're focusing on primarily is the business, and you're very casual or careless about ethical considerations in business. This is a little chart on why managers behave ethically. Most people do it to avoid punishment. That's the bottom line. Most people, the reason why they're conditioned to behave the way they behave is because they want to avoid some kind of punishment. Some of them will behave that way because they think they're going to be rewarded. Like if you think that doing right is going to get you a bonus every 6 months, then I'm not going to steal the Post-it notes and the pencils, and I'm going to report the way I'm supposed to report. Many of us behave ethically to be responsive to family, to friends, or superiors, or to be a good citizen. Very few folks behave ethically to do what is right, pursue some ideal such as justice or a religious foundation of what is right. Let's see, who is up? Dustin, are you up?
Yes, sir.
Justin, you are going to get to think about Peter. Peter, he had been a human resource manager for 18 years. Let me get it. There we go. Been a human resource manager for 18 years, vice president for 2 more years of the Zydeco Corporation. It's a small company in New Orleans. So I'm trying to bring it home to you. We're going to L.A. Last decade, there have been many changes to what can be asked a potential or actual employee and what constitutes fair and equitable treatment. Frankly, the situation Peter was in was partly his own fault. The issue first began with the hurricane. After Hurricane Katrina, Zydeco employees had been working around the clock to get the company up and running. The company had been calling all their former employees, if they could locate them, to rehire them. Gwen, one of Peter's human resource managers, was planning on rehiring somebody named Dana Gonzalez. But she found out Dana was pregnant. Because of the rough conditions of the workplace after the hurricane, Gwen was concerned for Dana's safety. Gwen feels that if Dana is rehired, her hourly wage should be increased by 25% because, as she said, the entire group has exceeded their budget. Gwen had asked some serious, difficult questions, and Dana stated that if she was not rehired, she would go to a competitor and expected the company to pay severance of 2 weeks' wages. In addition, Gwen is concerned Dana may not really be a U.S. citizen because some of her documents appear to be questionable and possibly fake. The flooding destroyed the original documents, and although Gwen has requested new ones, Dana has been slow to provide them. Now, another major issue. is hiring truck drivers. Zydeco hires many truck drivers, routinely request driving records as a part of the pre-employment process, but several of them have got DUIs. So here's Peter. He's got to make a decision on Dana, and he's got to make a decision on who to hire, whether or not to lower their standards and look at people who've had DUIs to be their truck drivers. If it were only these two issues, Peter would not be so concerned, but he is. The problem really started when Peter was still the HR manager and revolves around a single family. Guy Martin started working at Zydeco 20 years ago, married, 2 children, with a mortgage. Families had its ups and downs. On several occasions, Guy was separated from his wife. Last year, they divorced. But 6 months later, they remarried one another. When Guy was hired, Peter made sure that the guy's son, who had asthma, would be covered instead of being listed as a pre-existing condition on their insurance. Peter also helped the family out several times when money was tight, providing Guy with overtime work. I know how it is, Guy, to have kids and have a stay-at-home wife. It can really be hard to make ends meet, but in the long run, your children have a better chance of turning out okay. I know what you mean, Pete. If Martha had been working, I'm afraid the boys would have gotten into real trouble. She's always been there making sure that homework was done, meals prepared, just to keep all the things Mother has doing. Peter laughed and said, you know, a mother at home is equal to about $80,000 to $100,000 a year. Tragedy struck when the Martins, when Guy was killed in the hurricane. He had gone to Zydeco, to the warehouse, to help evacuate machinery from the products from the gust of wind that tore off the roof. They never found the body. And guys, this is another real case scenario. There's a strong possibility that he could have been taken away by the floodwaters that were infested with alligators and venomous snakes. Because Martha, Guy's wife, was a stay-at-home mom, their only income had been from Zydeco. Death benefits from his retirement program only provide 50% of the benefits to a surviving spouse. Also, because the body had not been found, there was a legal question of whether or not he was dead. Usually it takes up to 7 years before somebody can claim any type of death payment. Even Social Security would not kick in until somebody had declared him legally dead. Zydeco had been sustaining substantial losses since the hurricane. Insurance companies were extremely slow concerning payments to all the small businesses. The storm really began for Peter late last week when he met with the insurance company about medical reimbursement, death benefits, and pension plans for all the employees that were affected by the hurricane. Daryl Lambert was the chief adjuster for Zydeco's insurance and pension provider. He goes into the office and he tells Peter, here's another case we will not cover. He flipped the file over to Peter. He said, we can't help the Martins for a variety of reasons. First of all, there's no body. No body, no payment until the judge declares him legally dead. He said that'll take at least a year, and while that's being settled, Ms. Martin and her family will not be eligible for medical coverage unless Zydeco is going to pay their amount. Finally, and I know this sounds heartless, but Ms. Martin will only get a maximum of half of Mr. Martin's pensions. Peter exclaimed, but the guy was killed on the job. The insurance adjuster asked him these questions. He said, did you actually require him to work that day? Did he punch in or out? Is there any record that he was called in from Zydeco to help? The answer is no to all of the above. He helped because he felt obligated to help. But I'm not obligated to help him, and I do not have any obligation to the Martins. Daryl, the insurance adjuster, said, I know that Zydeco is under extreme financial pressure, but we are too. He said you have approximately 100 families that are going to have to pay something. You and I can spend the next 12 months going over every single case, bit by bit, item by item, if that's what you want. But he said Zydeco is going to go into bankruptcy. We don't want that to happen, but we're not going to pay everything that you claim you're due. Our lawyers will stall the system until you go broke, and your 100 families will get nothing. Now, here's my proposal. You look over these files, you reduce your total reimbursements to us by 40%. To help you out, I'll start with the Martins case. You decide whether we pay the 40% or nothing. Tomorrow at 9 a.m., I want you to have these 25 cases pared down by 40%. If not, you can hear from my supervisors. Dustin,
Yes, sir.
you're Peter. You got
Okay.
roughly 12 hours.
Okay, first of all,
To
I would
decide
not hire
if-
this Dana Gonzalez until they got the record for her.
Okay.
Bit of business. I would fire all the truck drivers that had any kind of DUI problems, which would in turn lower my insurance.
The only catch there is there's nobody else. We're talking about New Orleans. There ain't that many people.
It doesn't matter.
You got to have somebody to move your product.
we would find something else out.
Okay?
And then, after I did that, obviously you have a company to run, and you cannot lose a company over one family. Okay? You have to realize that you have to do what's best for that family, the guys. Also,
Okay.
you have to do what's best for the rest of your employees. So either the rest of your employees get nothing or they get 40%, if that's what I understand the question to be.
All right.
Correct? So obviously,
Yes.
everybody would understand they would get 40% after a company meeting. I would get everybody together, inform them what's going on because of the catastrophe, inform them that there's going to be government aid sent in eventually. Everybody's in the same boat. We need to work together on this until they get everything situated. And currently, we're working at a 40% refund until we get everything worked out. And that's what would have to be. Because you can't strand all of your company for one family, and vice versa.
Do you think he's too emotionally involved?
Sorry, you didn't come in so late.
Do you think that Peter is too emotionally involved with the Martins to look at this objectively?
He might be emotionally involved, but in any kind of business, you have to step out of that emotional box. You cannot successfully run a business on emotions.
Okay?
Doesn't matter how, it's going to be hard on him, yeah. A lot of people say it's very hard to do business with family. And a lot of people stay away from that for that reason. But you cannot let you cannot let all your employees suffer because you're selfish emotions.
So you would take the 40% payoff.
Yep. That would allow
Everybody
every
else in
family to
there
at least
agree?
get 40% instead of nothing.
Does everybody else agree? I can't see. Dan, have you got your hand up?
No.
40%?
Okay.
That's your option?
40% or nothing.
So even though, Dustin, these people had full coverage insurance through your company, you're going to set them down and say, sorry, guys, we're going to have to roll with 40%.
Yeah, you have no other choice. And I think they understand. It's going to be hard on them just as hard on you. But when you sit them down and realize, hey, this is it's a catastrophe, they understand that, for one. Nothing's ideal in a catastrophe.
Okay?
And if you tell them, because of what's going on, until we get some kind of government aid, until everything gets situated, you're either going to get a chance of getting 40% or zero. They're all going to agree that the 40% is going to be better than nothing. And you can also...
What do you other guys think?
Okay.
What do you guys think about it? Sean?
Question, how exactly would they get this 40%? Is it, I didn't really understand what you're saying about that part.
Okay, basically you got families who were affected by this hurricane that were insured by the company. And the insurance company is coming back to the company saying, yeah, you may have had this great insurance and everybody was 100% covered, but we're only going to pay 40 because this is a major claim and la-di-da-di-da, and if you try to go against us, we're going to basically put the Martins out on the street and cause all kinds of headaches. John?
Isn't that a typical ploy on insurance companies, though? You go down and you have a accident down at the corner here. The other person's insurance company or even your insurance company is going to try to pawn it off on somebody else, or they're initially going to come at you at the lowest number. I don't know. Now, obviously,
Absolutely.
I don't know the situation of this company. If they have strong legal help whatsoever, I don't know. If they're coming at you at 40%, not knowing anything else, I'd want to try to fight that for all my employees within my.
What if it meant that you're likely to get more, but the Martins are going to lose their house? Again, guys, let me remind you this, and this one's not as clear-cut as a lot of things, but, you know, right is always right, wrong is always wrong. And so if you've got a insurance company that is doing something wrong, you know, I would at least explore the option of going over the adjuster's head and basically saying, look, this guy's trying to manipulate the situation due to a catastrophe. But the reason we've been paying premiums for 20 years into this company is because we wanted you to stand by us when something happened. When you think about what are problems that can go wrong with business, here's a few of them on the screen. I say on the screen. There we go. You've got prices that are too high, poor quality of many products, after-sales service. Can you guys see that?
No, not yet. You're frozen.
All right. Let's try again. There we go. Failure of many companies to live up to advertising claims. You got many products breaking or going wrong after you bring them home. I suspect every single one of us has at some point experienced misleading packaging. You know, that this product is going to do something phenomenal, and we get it home, and it's a piece of junk. Feeling that it was a waste of time to complain about consumer problems because nothing substantial will be achieved. Inadequate guarantees or warranties. How many of us have tried to take something back only to hear that that particular whatever is not covered because of some loophole?
Yeah.
You got failure of companies to handle complaints properly, the absence of reliable information, not knowing what to do if something is wrong with the product. Now, as you look at the list on the screen, the question I want you to think about is, do we as preachers have basically a duty to teach in the pulpit on these kinds of things?
Yes.
I mean, as you look at what it means to be ethical in business, honesty, fairness, integrity, lying, conflicts of interest, they're not getting it from other places. I'll tell you a quick story. There's a politician that was having a meal with a friend of mine. They had gathered a bunch of people together, and the bunch of preachers were there. The preachers were hammering this politician about standing up for legislation against abortion. It's either abortion or gay rights. I don't remember precisely which one. But long story short, the politician took the podium, the mic, and said, guys, I hear what you're saying, and I will do my best to stand up, but I need you to understand that the reason we're in the situation we are today is not because of politicians, but because people have stopped preaching this in the pulpit. He said basically politicians are 15 years behind where the pulpit is. And so the issues that we're dealing with in politics are issues that 5, 10, 15 years ago you stopped preaching about in the pulpit. And if you think about that, guys, I mean, let's be honest. When you think about same-sex marriage, have the denominational preachers not stopped talking about that 10, 15, 20 years ago? And as such, now it's in our politics. And so I think we do have some duty, as it is, to address some of these things. You look at external influences that would mold behavior. Here's a little breakdown. What I want to do is look at each one of these arms for just a minute. If we were to look at, for instance, the business ethics arm, you've got obviously values, you've got their beliefs, you've got corporate responsibility, corporate greed that can play into that. You look at the stakeholders. arm of this thing. So we got the bottom right arm. Who all has a stake in how a business is conducted ethically? Well, you've got shareholders, obviously, they have a big stake. You've got customers that have got a stake, employees that have got a stake, managers, local community, the environment, and suppliers. You look at each one of these different stakeholders. Shareholders, they obviously want profit. But that is probably going to mean one of the two is going to have to give. Either the shareholder is going to have to take less profit so that your product can remain good, or you've got customers that are going to get struck with an inferior product so that you can generate profits. Somebody give me an example of where companies have shaved or trimmed something in order to basically keep profits up, but their costs go down.
Taking their production or their jobs overseas.
Okay. Let's do some overseas printing or manufacturing. How many of you in that room have bought ice cream lately? Like from a grocery store?
Yeah.
What have they done to the boxes of ice cream? You guys may not even have seen it or noticed. They used to be half gallons. You know what? Guess what? They're not anymore.
Half gallons.
They're not half gallons, guys. Even though the packaging still looks very, very similar, they've actually taken about a cup of product out of every single one of those boxes.
It's probably better for the people.
Going metric on
What are some other examples like that?
The bag of chips, like you have like a huge bag of chips, and they like take half the chips out.
Supposed to get the air.
Make the bag bigger, and give you less chips.
Okay.
They do that.
That's pretty good.
So the packaging still looks the same, but we're going to take out product and we're going to inject air into the top of it.
Same way with the M&Ms.
Or you don't actually, you don't get the problems with your brakes figured out before you put the car out there for the public to buy, and then the public is driving the car and they can't stop the car, and it speeds up, and they crash into things.
Okay.
It's off the top of my head.
So basically, Chris, what you just described, though, is a honesty and disclosement deal. When you sell something like a house or a car, you are supposed to disclose any problems that you had. Like, for instance, let's say Coker finds a house in Denver that's like $100,000 below market price, and he's fired up and excited, and he goes and he puts down, because he's got big money, he puts $25,000 down. And only after the sale is complete and they've gone to closing does he find out that that house used to be a methamphetamine manufacturing house. And there's all kinds of chemicals that are in the walls of that house. And he realizes if he puts his children on the floor and they go around bare feet, they're going to burn their feet. Well, they obviously did not disclose that to him prior to the sale.
Right.
Here's the rest of the stakeholders. You got local community, you got government. In other words, the government's got a stake. They want you to abide by the law, to pay taxes, to abide by regulations that they have put in place. And guys, I'll tell you right now, some of the regulations that the government is putting on us, I feel like are exceptionally stupid. But I have to give to Caesar what is Caesar's. These new OSHA standards, there's a church that basically all they want to do is build a overhang so that their elderly women can get into the church building without getting wet. But they were told before they could do that, now the overhang itself was projected to cost $8,000. Before they can do the overhang, they would have to bring the entire church up to codes, which is $1.1 million. because they'd have to retrofit all of their bathrooms to be handicap accessible. They'd have to install an elevator, all of this stuff just to get them up to current codes before they can do an overhang. You know, to me, that's borderline insanity there. But that's the way the government has basically played into it. You got the environment. Let's say that Chris and Dustin are both producing widgets, and they produce this byproduct that's harmful. Chris decides that he's going to dump his illegally, and he saves himself $700,000 a year. Dustin is following the letter of the law, but he is barely breaking even, and he's about to go out of business because he's paying to have this stuff properly disposed of.
You're right, I'm going to heaven. I'll hire him.
You'll hire him. All right, what about the moral behavior leg of this whole thing? You've got that which is right, that which is wrong. You've got trade with corrupt regimes. You know, we talked a little bit about doing stuff overseas. Obviously, I don't think you guys need to worry about trading weapons, although people do that. Humanitarian issues. You know, are you buying product or using product from a country that is basically enslaving people? What about advertising promotion? Are you using sex to sell your product? Regulation, safety of product and workplace. What about research and development, testing things? So you've got all these different arms that are, you know, basically affecting this particular side of it. All right, who's up next?
Hey.
Mr. Dan.
Go slow, Brad. I got a little brain.
Before I start reading this, let me throw this out, because on Thursday you guys are probably going to be watching a video, and I'll go on and tell you, I'm struggling internally a lot about whether or not to show it to you, and I've gone back and forth both ways. It is exceptionally well done in that it really does communicate and teach a lot of good stuff, but part of it is on advertising what we're doing to women. And obviously they have to use examples, and some of the examples are modest. I don't ever want to put bad material in the hearts and the minds of people. And so I'm wrestling with it. It's one of those things where I know you see it anyway in magazines, you see it on or on magazine shelves, but in the same light, I don't want to be the one to necessarily do that, to perpetuate it. I also know this is a class, so it's not like we're Googling and staring at somebody. The lady who did one of the videos that I really, really like, her name is Jean Kilbourne. She wrote the book, I'm going to stick it up to this deal so you guys can see it, called Deadly Persuasion. Any of you that have daughters, you need to buy this book or get it from the library or check it out, because she really, really, really explosively uncovered what was going on in the advertising world and what's going on with basically how we do women, period. Dan.
Yes, sir.
Jim is his fourth year in a corporation called Cinco. He's made a plant manager 3 months ago after completing the company's management training program. Cinco owns a pulp processing plant that produces various grades of paper from fast-growing, genetically altered trees. Jim's plant, the smallest and oldest in Cinco, is located in upstate New York. It employs 100 to 175 workers, mostly from the nearby town. In fact, the plant boasts about employees whose fathers and grandfathers also work there. Every year, Cinco holds a 4th of July picnic for the entire town. It's very much a community organization. Their policy is to give each manager a free hand in dealing with employees, the community, the plant itself. But the upstate New York location is actually a trial. Every new manager is put in upstate New York location for at least 2 years to see if they can handle business. Once their tenure of 2 years is done, basically the sentiment is, if you can work there, you can work anywhere. So the upstate New York location is a proving ground. Jim's wife, Elaine, has been keeping things running smoothly, but she's having a difficult time adjusting to this upstate New York location. Speaking with other managers' wives, she learned that this prison sentence, as she called it, typically lasts no more than 2 years. Jim received a call from the EPA last week, told him that their mill's waste disposal into the river exceeded the EPA's guidelines. Ralph, the EPA supervisor, said that he would stop by next week to discuss the situation. Jim hung up the phone and he asked his secretary, Ramona, to try to review because he was very compulsive about what they were dumping. They reviewed all the tests from that present week and realized that they had no EPA violations. He had Ramona ask the guys to do another test that day. And again, everything came up clean. That night, Jim decided to make a spot visit of the mill to test the wastewater at night. When he arrived at the river, he knew by the smell that something was very wrong. He immediately went back to the mill, demanded to know what was happening. Chuck, the third shift foreman, took Jim down into one of the lowest levels of the plants. In one of the rooms stood 4 large storage tanks. Chuck explained to Jim that when the pressure gauge reached a certain level, a third shift worker opened the valve and allowed the waste to mix with everything else. You see, Chuck told Jim, the mill was never modernized to meet EPA standards. So we got to divert the bad waste here twice a week. It goes into the river. Who knows about this? Asked Jim. Everybody who needs to, said Chuck. When Jim got home, he told Elaine about the situation. Elaine's reaction was, does this mean that we're going to be stuck here? Because if we are, I don't think I can handle it. If we're here more than 2 years, our marriage is literally going to be at stake. Jim knew that there would be, Jim knew that all the managers before him must have known about the same problem. He also knew that there would be no budget for installing EPA-approved equipment for at least another 2 years. The next morning, Jim checked the EPA reports and was puzzled to find out that the mill had always been in compliance when there really should have been warning notices and fines affixed, but he never saw any. That afternoon, the EPA supervisor, Ralph, stopped by. He talked to Jim about the weather, about hunting, about fishing, and then he said, Jim, I realize you're new. I apologize for not coming sooner, but I saw no reason to because your predecessor had taken care of me up until this month. What do you mean? Jim asked. Ralph said, well, Ramona, your secretary, will fill you in. There's nothing to worry about. I know nobody in this town wants to see the mill closed down, and I don't want it either. There are lots of memories in this old place. I'll stop by to see you in another couple of months. And with that, Ralph left. Jim asked Ramona whether or not about what Ralph had said, and she showed him a miscellaneous expense every month of $150. How long has this been going on? Asked Jim. Since the new EPA rules were released several years back. She went on to clarify Jim's alternatives. Either he could continue paying Ralph, which didn't amount to much money. He could refuse to pay Ralph, in which the EPA fines would then be enforced, and a potential shutdown of the plant. As Ramona put it, headquarters only cares about the bottom line. Now, unless you want to live here the rest of your life, the first alternative is the best for your career. Jim realized if he didn't report this, or if he did report this, he was going to be stuck in upstate New York for many, many more years, and his marriage would suffer. The rule in the industry is that if you can't manage Cinco's upstate New York plant, you can't manage anywhere. That's the way it is. What do you do?
Well, I would, means that I've been in that situation. I would report the EPA whatever his title was, investigator.
Okay.
I would report him to his office, and that's up. You have to do the right thing. You have to report it all the way up. I mean, no matter, because right is right on that. You can't. The damage that it's doing to the people that they might even know because of the water and Even though if they lose their career, their jobs and stuff, it still doesn't make it right.
Okay?
The EPA inspector needs to be turned into his supervisor. And I don't know if you said this, but why does I didn't hear if Jim knew that they couldn't update the plant, and he was just told that they couldn't, or he ever asked if they could.
Money. They don't have the money to do it. So you're looking at you're now looking at the possibility of unemploying 100 to 150 of the community.
Yeah.
Does that factor in?
Yeah. You're gonna have to do it.
Okay. Would any of you guys take the same approach, different approach?
I mean, you have to stop the cycle of, with the inspector and everybody paying them off and just doing a temporary, I'm here for 2 years, who cares about the people when I leave thing. I mean, it's our job, you have to stop the cycle.
Let me ask you this, guys. Would you get the rest of the employees at the plant involved? Would you try?
Meaning bring them up to speed?
Meaning basically kind of coming at it from, hey guys, we're a tight-knit community. We don't want to shut this plant down, but this is illegal. And if we as a group don't fix things, we're going to be unemployed and the plant's going to close. And basically put the responsibility on everybody rather than on a single individual.
Absolutely. That's a good idea.
Well, I don't know. You're the plant manager. That's what you should be able to. Because you're gonna get mixed emotions from a group. They're not gonna want to lose their. They're not gonna want to lose their jobs and their what do you call it? Nepotism has set in and stuff, and just because their dad did it and their grandpa did it,
Can you guys think of any company that has been through a ethical quandary and came out better for it, that has done a good job of cleaning up a mess?
Ford.
Okay, Ford? Right now, Ford is booming.
Yeah, they had a problem a few years ago with the tires, though. Good
That was
years.
actually Firestone.
Or Firestone, yeah. But I mean,
Yeah.
Ford got Ford, Firestone, both.
They- Ford did take some heat from it, but that was primarily Firestone's liability. What else? What about Tylenol?
Yep.
yeah.
Would you say that Tylenol survived the cyanide poisoning, whatever was going on many years ago, where people were dying?
I think, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, do people trust them now? They put safety caps on stuff so you can't break, if you break the seal, somebody's tampered with it. They came through that particular situation in a good light. Here's what I want you to remember for test-wise. There are certain essences of ethics that companies need to have in place, and I think one of the keys would be for us to look at organizations that have great customer service and that have some kind of an ethical standard where they have either built into place policies or practices, and that no matter what, that company is going to stand behind their product and they're going to stand behind their customer. These would be companies who are wanting to do everything they can to make sure the quality of what they are selling doesn't go down. And that integrity then permeates the entire organization. They would develop high expectations of not just the managers, but every single person working there, so that they have a vested interest in making sure that what we're producing is the best that it can be. When you look at an organization like that, you have to create an organizational culture that encourages open and honest communication, that there's continual learning, that there's personal development, and ultimately that there's a respect for people. Because if this isn't considered, then here's what you're going to find. You're going to find companies that routinely ignore or violate internal codes of ethics. Or companies that are looking to try to quick fix something. You know, if somebody gets slapped on the hand for using an inferior, say a gas pedal, for instance, and they try a $15 little piece of metal fix that deep down everybody knows may not be a fix, that's going to come back to bite them in many, many ways, probably in future clients, future customers. If they're unwilling to take an ethical stand where there's financial cost to the decision, in other words, if we're putting bottom line ahead of what we should do, if it creates an internal environment that either encourages unethical behavior or discourages ethical behavior. In other words, let's say you've got a business or a system where the good old boy network is so ingrained and so politically dirty or just secularly dirty, where somebody feels like if I go against the grain, I'm either going to be ostracized or kicked out or whatever. That's not a healthy environment for a company. If a company usually sends its ethical problems to a legal department, not a good thing. Looks at ethics solely as public relations tool to enhance its image. You know, there are PR companies that all they do is spin bad situations. So if a company finds itself in a nasty snafu, they hire this PR company to make the best of it and to come out smelling like a rose. You got a firm that treats its employees differently from its customers. Now, how hideous would it be for customers to come in and you've got this smile and this glow and you're welcome to come into our store, and as soon as people walk out, they're berating their employees to clean this up and pick that up and to do this. And you got companies that have no procedure or policies for handling ethical problems. You know, when something does happen, they basically all stand around going, I don't know. And guys, there's been many, many, many churches who are in that particular situation, where elders have not given any consideration to what are we going to do if and when X happens. If and when our youth minister gets caught with porn on his computer. If and when there's an affair between the preacher and somebody in the congregation. If and when it's found out that our sewer system is leaching all over the neighborhood. Or if and when we've got a neighborhood kid that's hurt skateboarding in our parking lot. You know, people that haven't given any consideration to that, it's a reaction rather than a proactive stance. Warning signs of ethical collapse. This is from an article I was reading. Number one, surround yourself with subordinates who are young, inexperienced, enthralled with power, deep in debt. There's a warning sign. That's a problem. Number two, send a clear message that you expect results at any cost. If you ever hear somebody say, I don't care what it takes, just give me results, you better watch. If certain CEO is tyrannical, prone to anger, there again, if people are scared of that person, then oftentimes if something is unethical, it will never be brought before that CEO's attention. When an employee's public statement brings criticism to the company and they cut the employee loose, that's not a good sign. And at last, when an ethical lapse is discovered, they never admit to doing anything wrong. They simply conceal it, spin it, or gloss it over. When you look at, we talked already about college students. This is a fairly recent statistic. 70% cheated on a test at least once. 87% of college students have cheated on some type of written work. 49 have collaborated with others on assignment. 52 have copied from somebody. 87% of business majors have cheated at least once. And so what you find is you've got this a system that is breeding unethical behavior in businesses. Somebody tell me, what is the honor code at Bear Valley? Obviously, we don't have an honor code.
Oh, cheat. Yeah, we do.
What?
What's the Bible? God's way.
You talking about 2 Timothy 2:2?
No, not
I'm talking about if you get caught cheating at Bear Valley, what happens?
Mark Hansen,
You're done.
You're done.
If you get caught, let's say that you are in the library and you're looking at porn, what happens?
Done.
Toast.
You should be done. So there is an ethical code or an ethical standard. And the point is, can we take that over to the business side? Questions, comments so far? All right, who's up?
I think I am. Maybe.
Mr. Sean. Sean, Chantel's been with Butterfly Industries for 13 years. She started out as an assistant buyer, was later promoted to a full-time buyer for the company. At one point, she married her boss, Juan, but they divorced several years later. After Juan left, Chantel threw herself into her work, and within a few years, she had moved into the corporate offices, but with only Whiskers, a black and white cat, to cheer her progress up the corporate ladder. During Chantel's tenure, Butterfly Industries grew from fewer than 500 employees to more than 35,000. The company expanded all over the world, opened offices on every continent. It had nearly exclusive arrangements with suppliers from 6 different companies. Such rapid growth eroded the freedoms of a small firm in which one could do anything one wanted. So many employees with different cultures, different languages, different time zones, varied clients from so many different cultures, each with its own political realities, made corporate life much more complicated. To Chanel, it seemed that the firm had grown at a whirlwind pace. Sometimes she thought that the whirlwind had become an ugly black cloud. She had heard, for example, that some of Butterfly's suppliers in Puerto Rico mistreated their workers. In foreign locations, Butterfly's products were beginning changes to the environment, as well as local cultures and gender roles. Because these workers tended to be women and children, because these workers tended to be women, the children were left to fend for themselves. In Latin American countries, husbands were angry because their wives earned more than they did. Internationally, Butterfly Industries was causing problems all across the board. After Butterfly went public, Chanel's sense of foreboding whirlwind grew darker as the headquarters employees scrambled to satisfy shareholders' demands. She was also troubled that so many corporate people were men. It was only her and one other woman directly involved in the inner workings of this company. Let me cut down to the chase here. A month ago, Butterfly's president, Germaine, asked Chantel to lunch. This wasn't unusual, but the conversation soon took a significant twist that Chantel was unprepared for. You've been with the company for 13 years now, right? Asked Germaine. She said, yep, that's about right. You know as well as anyone that I haven't kept pace with the growth. When I founded this company, I could tell a few staffers to check out an idea, and several weeks later we talked about it. There was time for everyone. I knew every employee and their families, but not anymore. I need to delegate more, and that's why I wanted to talk to you. Chantel, I've always been impressed with your work ethic, your sense of values. You know this company and the culture so well. Here's what I would like for you to do. I would like for you to become the head of Butterfly's new ethics committee. Of course, you know that we don't have an ethics committee, so that's where you come in. Chantel was surprised. If you're willing, he said, I want you to create this entity, run it so that we can all be proud of Butterfly again, so that people inside and outside the company know what we stand for. Chantel hesitated for a moment, then said, "Great, I'd love to." He said, "I knew I could count on you. The first thing I need is a proposed outline of the responsibilities of the new ethics committee, enforcement procedures, the works. I want it within 2 weeks, along with the list of people for the committee." You are Chantel. How do you prioritize the issues that should be addressed by this company?
I think I probably have to try to do something about the fact that there's some of their employees are choosing their work over their family, it seems. And so the different countries, I guess. I think I probably need to address the fact that, yeah, you need to get work done too, but for a lot of those women, their priorities should be their family. And, but,
Okay. You got a big problem then because Chantel is a female.
yeah.
Are you saying basically you fire people across the board if they're female?
I just probably give people better priorities as how, I don't know, it's confusing. So,
What do you think?
I think, well, I mean, first I probably need to pray about it, because just have the knowledge to approach that subject, but, I mean, I'd probably try to base the company's ethics more off of what the Bible says,
Okay.
because you can't go wrong with the Bible. But, so if you are straightforward with your customers, and if you put more of an emphasis on the fact that some of these people have families that they need to, not just drop their duties as, wives of the household, do all that sort of stuff too, and, I don't know, just enforce all the different business ethics that need to be addressed.
Any other guys, anything to add on that one? John?
Well, while you're there at that meeting, if you could think quick enough, I would be sharing with that president or whoever he was, CEO, that Mr. So-and-so, this is my, I'm going to be responsible for 35,000 employees, the ethics policy, and we're stretching across international boundaries. My core values or my moral beliefs are this, and this is how I would approach my ethics policy for your company. Is that going to meet your approval? If
Okay.
not, I am not your individual, because I have seen over the years or over time people in international communities that are not, in my opinion, not living ethically or
Right.
however you want to go about it. But it's kind of putting it back in his lap, saying this is how, we're here at this meeting. This is, let me just bounce this off you right now. I appreciate your trust in me, and this is how I would approach your ethics policy for your company. Do you mean, would you approve of this?
Guys, I don't know if y'all thought about when you take a preaching job, it is probably going to be in your best interest to have a ethical scenario written down, typed out, and walk into that elders meeting before you accept a job and just ask the men, how would you handle the following situation? So that you know where they stand. Because if you're going to be in a pulpit, you want those men to support and back you up. And if you find out that they are situation ethics guys, that they're going to, we'll look at each case on a case-by-case basis, and it might depend on if Sally Sue is a pillar of the church or if he's a big donor and gives a big check every Sunday. You got bigger problems. And that may be something that you don't want to throw yourself into.
What kind of question would that be, Brad?
I personally, if I'm interviewing for a job at a church, I'm going to throw out 2 or 3 scenarios. One that's going to involve marriage, divorce, or remarriage. I want to know where they stand, how far they're willing to go to bat on that particular topic. Number 2, we're going to talk about something sexual in nature amongst people in the congregation. Because, again, a lot of times in the church, we don't like to talk about sexual things. It's kind of that quiet sin that we like to sweep under the rug. But the way in which they handled that, or the way in which they would address that to the congregation, tells me a lot about their strength and their willingness to get up in the pulpit and do what's right. And then I would probably also ask them something about maybe disfellowshipping somebody. You know, you got a mom who is remarried, she's got 2 kids, she knows she's living in sin. Would you go to their house and tell them, you know, that they're going to be disfellowshipped? Because you can tell a lot about men's character and integrity from those kind of things. Real quick, John.
Yes, sir.
You are George. George is operations manager of a corn plant. I'm going to go through this one quickly. You were looking for a way to cut costs. Finally found in the Midwest some cheap corn. But when the rail car started coming in, one of the company's testers reported the presence of afloxacin, a naturally occurring carcinogen that induces liver cancer in lab animals. Once corn has been ground in the corn mill, however, the afloxacin is virtually impossible to detect. George knew that by blending the contaminated corn with the uncontaminated corn, he could reduce the afloxacin concentrations into the final product and got it down below 8%. George said they probably knew that corn was contaminated. That's why we're getting such a good deal on it. He also knows that there is no law that prohibits the shipping of contaminated corn to other countries. George's friend Jake comes up and says, George, all the suspected grain elevators, complain to them and demand a 50% discount. If they agree, buy everything that they have. But if we do that, the blends will just increase the contamination, George said. That's all right. When the blends start getting high, we'll stop shipping into the United States market and we'll go foreign. Remember, there are no fines for contaminated corn in Mexico. George learned that one person, Lee Garcia, an operation manager for the breakfast cereals division, had sold contaminated corn once. Yes, so what about it? Garcia said. I got a family to support and a house payment to make. For me, there was no alternative. I had to do it or face getting laid off. The following note appeared in the plant suggestion box to George. Use the corn or we all get laid off. Another note said process it and ship it off to Mexico. Another one said it's just wrong to use this corn. When George balked at Jake's proposed solution, Jake said, George, I understand your situation. I was there once just like you. But you got to look at the big picture. Hundreds of workers will be out of a job. Sure, the FDA says that aflatoxin is bad, but we're talking lab rats. We're not talking humans. The company gets a fine, the FDA tester gets reprimanded for screwing up, and it's back to business as usual. What do you do?
Glad I don't work at a corn plant. Eat whole wheat.
Killing me.
You fire them.
It doesn't make it right because the international policy or international law, there is none. It's
Okay.
It's affecting people's health, liver, what have you.
Right?
Because I don't see myself in this situation, but I see myself being a preacher who has a member of the church who's got this problem, and how am I going to counsel him? And that's why I put myself in this situation, because, I got to go to Galatians and say, okay, we got to act on the fruits of the Spirit. We have to dwell on these. Philippians 4:8. We have to dwell on these things. We have to follow the
Whatever's pure, whatever's just, whatever. Yes,
we have
absolutely.
to follow the example of Christ. And what would Jesus do? And, you know, WWJD, whatever. And it's, I'm sorry, not whatever. I didn't mean that irreverently. My goodness, that's all these scenarios are tough, but again, it doesn't matter. You cannot compromise on what's right. And I know there's families, you know, you're talking about not just your livelihood, you're talking about tens, 20s, hundreds of people's on the livelihood.
Yep.
And if there's contamination going out there, and you're directly responsible for it, you have to do what's right, and you have to.
Guys, here's the bottom line.
And say this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong.
Can John look to Scripture and determine that it is wrong to do something like that to other people? The answer is yeah. And do unto others as you would have them do unto you. The text over and over says, love your neighbors as yourself. So can we look to Scripture and understand that even though legally it may not be against the law to ship contaminated corn across the borders, biblically, I'm doing something that God would not approve of?
Absolutely.
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 Enjoyed it, guys. We will make sure you're working on your congregational plan. And I won't see you Thursday, but I'll see you Thursday.
Hey, Brad.